handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEPT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here on the Denise Simon Experience. We're going to move into the realm of cyber and self-protection because I think it is clearly a topic that is not discussed enough, and I don't think people necessarily understand how at risk they are hour by hour. So I've got the distinct pleasure of having Tom Kelly with us, and he's an ID Experts CEO, and he's with us to talk about the personal risks. He's been putting out some very good pieces. It really is public service. So he is the president and CEO of ID Experts, which I think is based in Portland, Oregon. And you provide data breach and identity protection services. I get that right, Tom?
That's absolutely correct.
Yay! Thank you. Thank you for being
We're
here.
off to a good start.
Yeah, when technology works. But, Tom, I see people putting up so much personal information on social media. And then I see them using, their debit cards. And I mean, they just kind of feel like we'll just use it wherever they can. And they don't necessarily understand the difference between debit cards and credit cards. And then I don't think that they're paying attention to their actual purchases at the retail level. So you did a little bit of a summary, and you've got 8 ways that people can, 1, begin to pay attention, and 2, begin to protect themselves. So, Tom, I'd like to kind of go over those with you if we could. And your first one is common sense and caution. Hat tip for that one, but tell us where you want us to go with that.
Well, it's, in fact, all these points here, these 8 points, they're applicable all the time. And taking care and looking after your security, your cybersecurity, just doing very reasonable and sensible kinds of things to not expose yourself unnecessarily. That's good all time, all year long. We're so active during the holiday season with our buying, with the amount of emails and offers that we're getting online, all the different ways that happens. You're kind of pulled into it, and sometimes in the rush and the hustle, you forget to do some things that you would otherwise do. So when you're making your purchases and you're going online, make sure you know where you're going. Make sure you know it's a website that you trust. Do your research. Don't go to websites that don't make purchases from websites that don't have, the HTTPS or the URL clearly there, that it's somehow just like an acronym up there. Don't, anything that looks fishy. And I don't mean phishing like PH. I mean the old classic fishy. We all knew what that means growing up. If it looks fishy, if it doesn't look right, if it feels even remotely wrong, then get out. Don't proceed. That's simple. And
I actually did that the other day. I was on a particular website that was being promoted on a website that I go to often, and I thought, man, that looks like some cool stuff. So I hung around in there, and I was clicking on this, and then all of a sudden I said, I'm not feeling good about this. And I get towards the end, and I didn't like it at all. As it turns out, the merchandise was a good price, but they wanted to charge me like $35 for shipping, and then it was coming from some obscure country, so I bailed.
Yeah, read the print. Make sure you read everything you're seeing. I mean, how many times have we seen, we'll talk about this on one of the other points down here, in terms of you'll get an email that'll come to you that'll look, there'll be a certain amount of it will look very legitimate. I know you get them, and I get them, and it'll be from a bank that you do business with or some organization asking verification, and you go up and you just hold your cursor over top the email address, and you'll find that it's coming from some completely bogus email address that has nothing to do, and this happens all the time. And
how do they get our email addresses, Tom, in order to do that? How is it they show up in our
they're being hacked, they're being procured, they're being sold, all kinds of times that you give your email. In fact, you ought to look at the privacy policies of the places you do business with, and some places actually will, in fact, gather the emails that you provide them when you're communicating with them, and those emails will be moved on, sold, or provided to other parties. So
I'm glad you said that.
How your emails get, our emails get out there, they get out there in a wide variety of ways. You don't have to necessarily just get hacked, but hacking your account is also another way that someone can get your email. But they get out there. Our emails are on so many different lists out there today. You really have to be very cautious of what comes into them.
Tom, at the top of in a toolbar at the URL, not the toolbar, but the URL, where you put in the website. Yep. A lot of people don't understand that there's a little lock up there. Would you explain what that little lock is?
Let me open it up and we'll just talk through it. I think I love doing something like that when we get it up there. So, the lock you're talking about on your URL?
On anybody's URL. That it necessarily means that there's a protection to that website, correct?
That's correct. If I go up there and I put in my ID experts, ID experts corp.com. That is my corporate site. And if I put in my idcare.com, my site comes up there, and I don't have that lockup on mine.
Yeah, some I think have the little lock with a red line through it, or a lock, or they do HTTP or HTTPS, meaning it's a secure site. The
HTTPS is what I look for. So that is what I historically look for, is the HTTPS.
And now we're seeing.
And now you will see the lock. Actually, mine has just appeared with the lock that shows the certificate. So you can click on that, and there it is. See, my lock showed up slowly here. And so now it shows the encryption in my certificate and shows that this is a secure, encrypted, completely secure site.
It's also very interesting. We might be getting a little sideways here, but even the search engines are telling website owners you had better use or get the secure HTTPS or the lock on there, because they're gonna, if you don't, they're not going to consider you necessarily credible, and they're going to put you way down on the search engines, especially if you do, commercial enterprise on the site. Correct? That's
absolutely true. And anything you do with the federal government, that becomes even more important. And we do work with both commercial breach response by commercial independent companies, but we also do a lot of breach response for the federal government. And so security is incredibly important once you're doing that. In fact, you're doing response for organizations that have already suffered a breach. So the last thing you want to do is provide that in a non-secure environment.
All right, kind of circling back to your points. Your next one is a very good one, and that is hanging on to your receipts. And I would argue, even if you feel like it's too cumbersome, then take a picture of them with your smartphone. Correct?
Absolutely. We're getting to a lot of people I know. An awful lot of people I know are in the habit now of not taking receipts. They figure, well, you're going to get a bill statement. Sometimes you look at the bill statement, sometimes you don't. But I'd be hanging on to those receipts, especially right now when you're out and doing your shopping. I think it's a good habit to get into. You think it's a pain, but it's not. And the bigger pain is if somebody starts accessing your account, and you have to unwind that. And so having that receipt is really critical.
And it may be a little bit of a pain on the front end, but it's a bigger pain on the back end if you don't have it.
Anybody who's had the breach activity, anybody who's had their identity taken, anybody who's had the unusual activity on your card that's not yours, fraudulent activity. Unwinding that is a pain. Now, typically the banks are getting really good on credit cards. When you're using a credit card, they've got usually pretty darn good protection. You call your bank, you tell them that it's not an authorized purchase. Typically, they will in fact move pretty quickly on reversing that out of your account.
This is the time of year. I mean, people don't really send Christmas cards anymore, do they? So they're now doing the whole digital thing. And I would argue to be very, very careful on the digital cards, even if it's not a Christmas card, it could be a birthday card, because there's malware that's packed in there, especially when so many websites are doing these greeting cards. Yeah.
And you see these all the time. As a rule, I simply do not open those cards. I don't either. I simply do not open them.
Thanks for the thought, but I'm out of here.
but it's absolutely, I don't open them for that exact reason. Now, there's a lot of these, the digital sites are very, very secure. A lot of them are, but I'm not going to, that's one more area I'm simply not going to put my effort into trying to determine. It's that
I have
simple.
a feeling.
By the way, I do miss the old cards that come in the mail.
Me too. And I used to send out millions of them. I don't do that anymore. But
we don't either. We send out some, but a very small, very few anymore.
Now, when it comes to devices and the software that's on devices, we're being told that we have all of these fun apps out there. And these apps do all kinds of things that make our lives so much easier. Here's some electronic coupons, and here's some, offers that you get off, or this will track a particular item that you want to buy. And I argue be very wary of a lot of these apps, because these apps can be fake, and that also tells you that you're going into another realm of which trying to unwind and fix will make your life a nightmare. Did I get some of that right?
You got it almost exactly right. In fact, if you think of the apps that are out there today, there's certain apps that you can get for certain exchanges. I'm not going to be in the business here of promoting any one exchange, but for example, if you go into the Apple exchange, you can generally be pretty sure that you're not going to be getting an app there that's going to bringing malware with it. That's going to bring malware, a virus. But whether or not it's completely secure, that's an entire different question. When I say completely secure, does that app have all the security necessary to protect whatever you're doing on it? That there's no avenue into that app by somebody who is getting access to your information or elsewhere, so you're protected. That is, and many of the apps are very secure. But there are companies now that are, in fact, emerging, that are out there and coming up, that are testing these apps and being able to provide assurances that they are in fact secure. Not only that they're, of course, not bringing with them malware or viruses, and depending on the exchange you get your app from, you can be pretty confident with that. But the security side of it is a growing concern, because we have so many of these apps on our phones and our other devices. So your listeners ought to be very careful about that. Going in and just seeing something, having a note sent to them, coming across the email that this is a great app, surfing the web and finding, being sent to websites that download our app here. Be very careful of that. Be very, very careful of that, and know exactly what you're downloading. And unfortunately, there's no master list right now of all the bad apps and all the good apps. But I think over time you're going to see more and more services that will be able to test those apps.
I think I just passed you in the food court over there at the mall, and you were on your smartphone using a public network or a Wi-Fi. Do I have to come over there and tap you on the shoulder and say, stop doing that?
Well, it depends on what you're doing. We all use those. I mean, you and I have been in airports before, waiting to where we've had delayed flights and others, and you're hooking into the airport Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Just be careful of what you're doing in a public Wi-Fi. Conducting transactions and passing terribly personal information across, credit card information, all that. Just be careful. That is a risk. I know it's convenient. I know that it's easy, as I would say, to sit down at Starbucks and have your latte or your coffee or your tea, and buy Cousin Bob the present that you know he wanted, and send it off to him. But be very cautious about providing that kind of financial information in public networks. They're more easily accessible. They're much easier to get through, and there are There are spying technologies, listening technologies, and hacking technologies that people utilize in public network areas to get your information. So be careful. I'm very selective about what I do when I'm in a public network.
Me too. I'm glad you said that, because I mean tablets now are becoming as common, a device is really a smartphone. I mean, you don't really have laptops so much anymore, or you certainly don't have desktops anymore. And so, you may be using your smartphone over here in your one hand, and you may be using your tablet over here. And the next thing you know, you're on a public network, or you're on some Wi-Fi that you really didn't know that you were on, because you're kind of migrating from one tower to the next, if you will, or one system to the next, and you don't realize this is happening. So I would recommend, and tell me if I'm right, that you pay attention to your connectivity. You need to kind of go back into your settings every once in a while and see what is sitting there that you had no idea that you were really connected to, right?
Absolutely. You should clear these things out. You don't want them always sitting in there. And the fact is, most of the networks that you want to be on are going to ask you for some kind of an access to get into them. If you go to the hotel lobby, if you're in the hotel lobby, even if you're in Starbucks, you're typically being asked to access that. So you're going into that network. Networks that you slide into, you just don't want to be part of, period. You don't want to be. That simple.
Everybody is using password. Well, no, let me say that again. A lot of people have maybe one or two passwords that they use for all of their transactions when they're using the net. And I would argue that you're going to have to keep some little, index card someplace, and that you really should be using unique passwords, including nothing with your name in it, on any of your transactions that you do on the internet when you're dealing with sensitive personal information. And that I don't think that people understand that, at least twice a year, they need to be changing these passwords.
At least twice a year. And in fact, there's an awful lot of places that are putting now just, good hygiene is saying in some cases, 90 days minimum. You'll see certain organizations that are changing them every 30 days. Passwords, what do we do? When we set up a password, the first thing we do, we want to try to remember it. The last thing we want to do, because you're thinking, well, do I want to write this down? If I write it down and put it someplace, it's less secure. So, what do we use? We use the name of our dog. We use our own name. We use mom's name. We use part of our street address, for where we live. A whole group of things. The high school I went to, the college, my favorite sports team. I've heard them all, and those are all pretty darn easy to hack and pretty darn easy to discern. What you need to do is to come up with passwords that have all the characteristics that good password hygiene asks for, and you see that on websites. Use capital letters and lowercase letters. Use numbers. Use symbols and intersperse them. Just make it much more difficult to do that. And if you're signing up and using a password for a site that you're going on to make a particular purchase, maybe one that it's a good site, it's a reputable online retailer, and that you need a password to in fact transact, don't be using a password that you're using for your bank account or for your email, your secure email site. All that, try not to use those very secure passwords that you reserve for that. That's just good hygiene. And yes, rechange your passwords. Change them throughout the year. And you're right, twice a year is a minimum, I think. A minimum that you want to do that. But be alert to that. And of course, if you ever have any suspicion, if you've been alerted that you've been breached, one of the first things they tell you is to go and change all your passwords, to change them and update them.
Do people necessarily understand, Tom, that there's also a chain of events that happens? In other words, if you get some kind of phishing scam that shows up into your email and you've done whatever that you've done, it's kind of planted there. And so it's going to end up in other people's, you're spreading the disease. Did I get that right?
That's correct. Absolutely. I mean, we have all, here's the one that I'll bet you have received, because I've received it, and I'll bet you a lot of your listeners have received this one. It's the email from somebody you know somebody you know that says, hey, I am in Spain, or I'm someplace right now, and I've lost my wallet. Can you send me $50 or $100 so I can get, cab fare back to the hotel, or get, it comes in like that, and it's somebody you know. That is somebody who's been hacked, and they're utilizing their email now to outreach to you in order to, in fact, entice you to do something, to pull you in. And of course, once you respond to that, then you're now part of the team as well. Yeah.
Well, and if you receive an email from somebody that you know that you really don't communicate with, or it's kind of an email out of the blue, because you may communicate with them in a text message, but not so much in an email, and all of a sudden an email shows up, I would argue pick up the phone or send them a text message and say, hey, dude, did you just send me an email?
Absolutely, that's good practice. But I'll tell you one thing for certain is don't click on anything that comes from there unless you're when you get an email from somebody that has it says, hey, you ought to take a look at this. Click on here. This is terrific. Take a look at this. You better be pretty darn sure what you're clicking into. I think it becomes increasingly easy to spot these, but for some of your listeners, it may not be. Just don't click on those things. Do not click through. I'd pick the phone up and call somebody if they sent you that for sure before you ever touched it, and there's a good chance, even if they tell you this is something you ought to look at, be very wary of that. I have, let's just say we have some family members in my family who have sent things that they think are really curious, and their computers are infected with stuff, and I know darn well I'm not going to let that stuff get near me.
Once, Tom, that we think that there might be something weird that has just happened, that we've gotten, in the last month, 2 or 3 kind of bizarre emails that we think we shouldn't have necessarily gotten, but it appears to have come from somebody we know. What steps do we take? Do we go run, some kind of a virus scan, or, if they're especially egregious, do we need to go report those to, the FBI cyber unit? I mean, what do we necessarily need to be doing?
I think what you ought to do is just make sure you've got good virus software, virus protection software on your computer. Make sure it's updated, and make sure you don't open those emails. And you could well be just simply identified. You could be on somebody's email list or contact list that has done something foolish by clicking into something, and now you're part of an effort where people are trying to entice you into it. So. If it looks to be like a scam, you can always report it to your district attorney. That's typically where these go, and put it there. But I wouldn't put a lot of faith that you're going to see a lot of follow up on that.
Yeah.
On that. So I think your listeners are better served by making sure that they're doing the things that they can do to protect themselves. To the extent they want to pass that information along to whichever governing authority, whether it be a federal authority or a state or a local authority, that's fine. If it were me, I would be more focused on making sure that I am protected, that my virus protection software is installed, that it's up to date, and that I'm simply not clicking in and responding to these kinds of emails.
You cyber guys are always, for people that are paying attention, are telling us an awful lot of these things. And I would argue that maybe an additional 2% a year are paying attention, not nearly enough. You're trying to really give us a public service announcement, because everybody jumping in and protecting, we help the entire country, don't we? I mean, if you're trying to mobilize, forces here to stop these intrusions, correct?
Yeah, it is. But it's kind of like I like to kind of press the rewind button a little bit and say, there was a time, in fact, there's still a time, if you or I went on vacation and you get back and your front door's open and your TV's gone, something bad's happened. Someone's been in your house. And so, and hopefully, if your neighbors are gone and they tell you're going to be gone, we rely upon neighborhoods and people to kind of look after one another and to help one another to keep your environment safe. So our cyber threats, this is really about safety. It's about how our safety understanding is changing. And there are different ways now that we put ourselves and our families at risk, and different ways now that people are trying to put us at risk. So all the things we do, if it was physical, you lock your doors, maybe you have a night light on, for being able to get your way up the path so you don't stumble on the way in the front door, or making it less attractive for somebody to walk in. There's all things that people recommend. But in our cyber world, it's the same area. It's to keep yourself generally safe. It's not to make yourself non-functional and make it so you can't even conduct a normal life, but use good sense. Change your passwords. Don't go to places that you don't know. Don't click on things. These are all things your mother would have told you, if you just kind of reverse it back to a physical standard. And so just be cautious. And the internet, you sit there and you think, I'm getting to do all kinds of things, that I can go places and look at things that I wouldn't otherwise do. Well, be real alert to that. And be very alert to the passwords you're using and how you protect those, the information you send online and to who you're sending it to. All the things you and I have been talking about, these are things that we do. And if you see something going on, let your friends know. Let your friends know, because I find out about phishing attacks and new things from my friends who say, hey, be careful. I just got this approach to me. Be alert. It might be coming to you too. These are not bad things to do for one another.
Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Kelly, idexpertscorp.com. Remarkable presentation, Tom, and thanks so much for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience.
Denise, can I add one thing real quick?
Yes.
2 seconds?
Yes.
Anybody, if you need there are certain things that are really good too, and these are called identity protection plans. And these are plans that are not terribly expensive. You can sign up for them, and they provide you all kinds of service and alerts to protect your identity and to, in fact, alert you if somebody's misusing it, and to help you restore it if it ever in fact does get compromised. Our company offers one. It's called myidcare.com, just like the words, myidcare, all one, .com. And that's my little advertisement there.
Good deal. Thank you, Tom, and ladies and gentlemen,
Denise.
thank you.
Happy holidays to you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You too.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you these two 24/7 streams of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. Talk America Radio is a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. Please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. You can contribute monthly or send us a one-time amount. We'll put it to good use continuing to share the American voice. Thank you.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Hi, this is Captain Matt Bruce from the Captain's America Third Watch, and you're listening to Talk America Radio, the new dominant force in conservative talk radio.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia.
And Don Newen from Cowboy Logic Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't go to sleep every night completely fatigued from trying to restore America from the destruction that is taking place,
then you're simply not doing enough. Join us every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, for Cowboy Logic Radio.
let the restoration begin.
You're listening to your local news source, WLBB, News Talk 1330 and FM 106.3.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia. And WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. President Trump was at it again, and this one I happen to agree with in a big way. And it was kind of interesting on what caused this, but President Trump, rightly so, I believe, unwound some of President Obama's activities when it comes to the Antiquities Act and eliminating some of the government outreach, or well, I don't know what the word is, cannibalizing maybe public lands on the, particularly on the Bears Ears National Monument. Pacific Legal Foundation was with us several weeks ago discussing this and why unwinding it would be a good thing. And so Mr. Jeff McCoy is with us from Pacific Legal, kind of giving us an update, because now it's gotten actually more convoluted. So, Jeff, thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience.
Thanks so much for having me back. I appreciate it.
You know, now I think we're up to 5 lawsuits on this thing, suing Trump for, I guess, winding back this proclamation here, correct?
Yeah, there's been several different lawsuits. It's hard to keep up with all of them, but there's been environmental groups, also Patagonia, the outdoor wear company, has sued, basically trying to claim that this order that President Trump signed on Monday, which reduced the Bears Ears National Monument by approximately 1 million acres, is illegal. And really that argument would that it's illegal is pretty ridiculous.
Well, I was kind of reading a summary here on what Patagonia's lawsuit is about, and it really only says that they're worried about that these lands will be sold off for corporate use. Especially when it comes to oil drilling and mining and other industrial activities, and that, the hunters and the outdoorsmen and the families, can no longer enjoy them. That doesn't seem even close to what's reality, right?
Right. And I think one thing that Patagonia has not mentioned or failed to mention is that President Trump's order does not remove these lands from the federal government. They're still federal lands, and there's still a lot of laws and regulations that apply to these federal lands that protect the environment. Now, there is some more multiple use. Monument designations are very restrictive on what type of use are on the lands. So this order is good in that it will allow more use. And especially for things like ranching and other use, and it also, I think, would the revocation, or not the revocation, but the reduction of the monument will actually help access, because one thing that the monument designation does is it prevents certain vehicles from certain off-road vehicles, and it prevents the creation of new roads. So actually, if you want to promote access, then a monument designation hurts people's ability to access these lands.
Here's a paragraph. To defend our business, Patagonia's business, and obviously they're a corporation, relies directly on public lands like Indian Creek in Bears Ears, which hosts world-class climbing powered by national monuments, national parks, and other special public lands that draw millions of visitors a year. Outdoor recreation is America's 4th largest industry, driving an $887 billion annual consumer spending. $887 billion and 7.6 million jobs, according to the Outdoor Industry Association. There's something tells me that this whole outdoor recreation industry is not one worth $887 billion, but I could be really wrong. And there's nothing there that keeps outdoor recreation from still happening at Bears Ears, correct?
Right, and that's what's so puzzling about their lawsuit is that people can still recreate. Like I said, these are still federal lands, and so nothing's preventing them from rock climbing. And like I said, it might actually be easier to access some of these rock climbing places because there's fewer regulations governing the lands. There's still a lot of regulations. Don't get me wrong, but the access is much easier on traditional federal lands than in a monument, because the monument designation basically heightens the scrutiny about what you are allowed and not allowed to do on the lands. So they do have a big business in it. I don't know. I assume that their financial records are correct, and how big of an industry it is. But either way, President Trump's order on Monday does not prevent anybody from going out there and rock climbing.
Jeff, when it comes to I guess what the tribal Indians necessarily are trying to protect, we also have ranchers. And we saw some of this if we go all the way back to the whole Bundy Ranch, chaos, is that ranchers often go to the federal government on federal lands and they get these grazing permits in order to, graze their cattle or graze their horses or whatever. But there's an awful lot of stipulations to those grazing permits such that they actually take, I would argue, a lot better care of that land and replenishing that land as a consequence of grazing than the federal government does, because that's part of the grazing permit. So even, the tribal faction in all of this, or the Patagonias of the world, they really don't have an argument on that one either, do they?
No, and you're correct. The ranchers have an incentive to protect this environment because it is their livelihood. And as you mentioned, this is not just a free for all when they go out and graze their cattle or other livestock. They are subject to regulations by the federal government, and they are monitored, and they are not just running around destroying the environment, and like I said, not like they would want to anyway. And actually, parts of the original proclamation that established the Beers Ears National Monument noted that grazing has been on this land for decades, if not centuries. So it's just as much a part of this landscape as anything else. And there is a threat when there's a monument designation that grazing may be reduced. And so this new order from President Trump will strike the proper balance in terms of ranching activities, but also all other uses on this land.
In your experience, at Pacific Legal, what was have we determined what the original motivation was for the Obama administration to use the Antiquities Act to declare this land, off limits and protected? I mean, was there some underlying motivating factor there such that Ryan Zinke had Trump unwind this?
I don't know the exact motivations. I think maybe it was misguided in terms of what President Obama thought that this proclamation could do. I'm not exactly sure what the original motivations were, but it does seem that presidents, especially late in their terms, they try and do something big to help their legacy. So that may be just what it was, and it was a misguided attempt to increase his conservation legacy. And like I said, it's not really it's not going to this new order by President Trump is not really going to ruin the land or turn it over to private companies to destroy the land. It's still going to be regulated as federal land, and it will still be conserved. And especially for people who have an interest in conserving the land, they're going to continue to do that.
Well, we know there's a revenue problem too when it comes to the states because, I mean, the federal government owning an awful lot of land in some of these states, Utah, Nevada, there is no revenue that comes in. And some of these states actually have, more government property than they have state property. And so those states necessarily suffer where others don't at all, because there's not a lot of federal government land. Are there similar lawsuits other than just the one on Bears Ears? I mean, does it have to do with the Grand Staircase land, or what? How's that working?
Yeah, there has been another. Some environmental groups have sued because President Trump signed another order on Monday that reduced the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument by about 700,000 acres. The monument is still about a million acres big. So, but he reduced it a pretty significant amount, and some environmental groups have sued on that. Kind of a similar theory that the president does not have the authority to reduce monuments, only the authority to create monuments. Which is counterintuitive, because usually when a government official has the power to do something, they have the power to rescind that same action as well. And the same thing is here. While the president does have some authority to create national monuments, that does not require that monument to exist in perpetuity. The future presidents can reduce it, especially because the Antiquities Act requires monument designations to be the smallest area compatible with the protection of the objects. And so a future president, if can look at the situation, and if the monument is not the smallest area compatible, there's nothing stopping him from reducing the monument in order to comply with the Antiquities Act.
All right, so we're going to court on this, obviously. So will a court even accept some of these initial cases, or do you think they'll be going go away? You got a president here that did this, and you got another subsequent president undid it, which a president can easily do. So I almost have a feeling that, a court may not even take this case. Do you think that's a possibility, or do you think that some of this is going to be settled in a court?
Well, I think there will probably be some motions to dismiss from the Department of Justice once they enter into the case, and they'll try and resolve this pretty quickly. And I do think it's pretty straightforward. Several presidents in the past have reduced have reduced monument designations. Never quite as big as this, but there is precedent for reductions. So it seems that it's a pretty straightforward case, and so hopefully this will be resolved quickly. It should be resolved quickly, but you never know with courts, and I'm sure that the plaintiffs in these cases, the environmental groups and Patagonia and everybody else, will fight tooth and nail to drag this out as long as possible.
What's Pacific Legal Foundation's role in this going forward?
Yeah, so we did comment on the monument review, and we are looking for various organizations that might be interested in defending this reduction. So we're hoping to get involved because we have been following this issue for a long time. The head of our DC office, Todd Gaziano, has done a lot of research on this issue, a lot of legal research, and has concluded that it's perfectly legal, perfectly within the authority of the president to reduce monuments. And so
sure.
We're hoping to get involved and join the fight. But like I said, hopefully we get involved and the case goes away quickly. But you never know how long these things are going to take.
Well, the previous administration not only did this with land, they did this with water too. As I recall talking to you guys, they did this, because of some restrictings, a whole bunch of the fishing industry up in the Northeast and, the northern part of the Atlantic and maybe even part of the Pacific. So, this was, I guess, from the Obama administration, it was an environmental, a bunch of these groups got together and, had made some demands. And, it's I didn't see a case where Ryan Zinke was defending an industry or not defending an industry. So I don't know really what his premise was, although I do think it's a good idea to do this on behalf of Trump. So I have to give him some credit there. But could this be a water thing too? Could this be something that the previous administration was doing it for water rights out of the EPA?
Well,
possible.
It may or may not be. Excuse me. The water rights. They are protected. So if the federal government tried to take away or interfere with water rights through these monument designations, that would likely raise a constitutional takings claim. But that may be one of the motivations, is to try and limit use. Again, I don't know. I can't read minds. I don't know exactly what the motivation behind this was, but whatever it was, the monument designation doesn't really achieve any of the stated goals, because there's already laws in place that protect these areas.
When you look at some of the pictures of some of these monuments out there or this particular land, it is remarkable. I have to admit, I've never seen some of this, maybe by air, but I haven't really figured out what I was looking at. So we have Patagonia, we got the Sierra Club. Is this going to be like a class action thing, or are they each filing individually? Do you know?
Well, so there was, I think, a handful of environmental groups that challenged the reduction of the Grand Staircase Escalante. They're represented by one lawyer, but it is it is several different organizations. Presumably, they work together to make things maybe a little bit simpler in terms of when to file, and so that they're not all competing against each other. But yeah, there are a lot of different groups in it. Like you said, there's a handful of cases. I'm sure that they'll all be all come under the purview of one judge, who will ultimately decide whether or not their claims have any merit. And like I said, I think that the arguments are pretty ridiculous, especially looking at the precedent set by previous presidents.
What district? Do we know what judge this is? You do, right?
Well, they have been assigned to the U.S. District Court in D.C., which is usually where a lot of these administrative decision cases have gone. So we'll see which judge ultimately gets assigned to. Like I said, I predict that there'll be one judge that's going to be in charge of all of these cases, and that will be worked out in the coming weeks and months. But yeah, right now it is in D.C.
Do we need this Antiquities Act?
Ultimately, I don't think so. It was originally passed in order to prevent looting of archaeological sites, and that was back in 1908. The technology these days has advanced so much, and like I said, there have been other subsequent laws, including like the National Historic Preservation Act, that do provide these protections. And too often, the Antiquities Act is basically, it creates national parks rather than these national monuments, which were supposed to be small and protect specific archaeological objects or specific archaeological sites. And so I think it's probably not as necessary anymore, and especially with how it's been used. National parks are supposed to be established by Congress, so that there's some broad support for it, and a broad consideration of all the consequences of that. And so I think really in terms of it, the Antiquities Act, if it went away,
nobody'd miss it.
Yeah, it wouldn't miss it. And if there are certain lands that should be fully protected or have national park status, then Congress can make that decision.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing. Maybe kind of beef up what is there if there's something that's really, a hot part of the Antiquities Act. But, Jeff, we've been at this a long time, and it wasn't until, Obama did what Obama did that we even knew necessarily. Maybe the people out west knew about the Antiquities Act, but the rest of the country certainly didn't. So it's almost kind of like we're digging out something here that really just didn't hit some headlines until it was controversial, and it didn't become controversial until the federal government decided to sweep in and or fly in and sweep up this land, and then you go to undo it. Is some of this land tribal land? Is it designated tribal?
Some of it is, but the tribal lands are separate. This is all these monuments are non-tribal land. There are some archaeological sites within this land, but again, like I said, there are laws that protect it. To your other point about how this wasn't very well known, it was in the West, and the other monument we've been talking about, the Grand Staircase Escalante, was established by President Clinton in 1996. It was 1.7 million acres, and a lot of Utah officials opposed it at that time, strongly opposed it at that time, but it has not made as much headway as now. I think it has been building for some time. I think maybe and each administration, the Clinton administration, even the Bush administration, has established so many monuments. I think it kind of just came to a head, and with President Trump's willingness to take a look at it, we finally have some national attention on this issue.
Does it have some effect on federal lands or federalism in other states that maybe only deal with 50 acres that you know of?
Well, and that is one of the issues, as you had mentioned. There are states, about half of the land in the Mountain and Pacific time zones is controlled by the federal government, and that does affect, like you mentioned, it does affect tax revenues for local governments, because they don't have the authority to use these lands and resources as they want. They're beholden to the federal government, and that does create almost like two statuses of states.
Indeed, it does. It's kind of fascinating, because we have this new term, federalism, that seems to be a big challenge to the Trump administration. I'm glad Pacific Legal's right in the middle of all this. And, I trust you guys are always you appear to be always on the right side of the law and the right side of this debate and this argument. And, you guys keep up with some things that, really protect us. Unsung heroes. That's what you guys are over there at Pacific Legal. You guys are just all unsung heroes. Jeff McCoy, we appreciate this update. It'll be an interesting thing to watch, but I have a feeling that there's going to be some dismissals in this, and I don't think any judge necessarily wants to take this up. So good work, and appreciate your time here on the Denise Simon Experience.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and if you want to follow along, you or listeners want to follow along, we'll post updates on our website at pacificlegal.org.
Excellent. And ladies and gentlemen, stay with us because there's more coming your way.
You can't handle the truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. See ya, over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. See ya, out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds AGBT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. We're going to switch gears now. We're going to talk a little bit about education because it's clearly a topic, an issue where I argue we just keep losing this battle. But I'm so pleased to be joined by April Few, who is a previous guest with us. And April is with the U.S. Parents Involved in Education, otherwise known as USPIE.org. And I implore you to visit that website because there's some new things that are happening here. And April is on a mission. And so thank you, April, for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Jingle bells, by the way.
Yes, thank you, Denise. I appreciate the opportunity to be on. And yes, we are fighting. I am fighting along with hundreds of thousands of parents, former educators, grandparents, just taxpayers in general, because whether or not you have children in the public school system, you are a stakeholder because your tax dollars are paying for what is happening in our public education system. So I appreciate you having me on, and I'd like to talk about student data privacy. USPI recently released our position statement on student data privacy, and it's called Data Personal Property Rights Position Statement, because we believe that your personal data is a part of you, and it is your personal property rights. That is your data. So what's been happening in recent years is parents they've had increasing concerns about the growing use of technology to collect an astonishing amount of data on students. It is just incredible the amount of data that they're collecting and selling to third parties, to people who say that they are researchers or they use evidence-based methods, things like that.
April, let me interrupt you here just a little bit. This was going on in a very robust way under Common Core, correct? And it's just kind of spilled out where, Common Core in some cases may be fading away. The model or the whole paradigm it has spilled over into just normal public education system, correct?
That's right. And a lot of states, they had Common Core. It was called Common Core. But now a lot of fighters in each state, people like myself, they fought to end Common Core. But what happened was they fought to get good legislation passed, but then it was just rebranded. So it's still Common Core. It's just not called Common Core. Here in South Carolina, it's called College and Career Readiness Standards. But yes, in the last decade, the federal government has handed states more than $600 million to help create databases. And now they're expanding the data collection from prenatal up. It's called the P20W. So P was supposed to be just prenatal up into the workforce. So 20, it was supposed to be from pre-K to 20, but now it's up into the workforce. So basically your whole life. And this is cause for concern because some of this data is so intimate, some is so revealing that it could hurt students 10 years down the line. Say they do something when they're a child and adolescent, and 10, 15 years later, that could come back to bite them in the butt. Something that they did, when their brain wasn't even fully developed. So there's one cause for concern. Another is, they're beginning to gather psychological data now by monitoring, and I'm not making this up, nearly every click and keystroke that your child makes during digital lessons, whether on the computer at school And this is evolving into the push for social and emotional learning. So they track all of this psychological data and what your child, the behaviors that your child exhibits, things like that. And I mean, my opinion is that they're thinking, who's a follower, who's a leader? Who can we manipulate? Who is vulnerable? You know, it's very scary stuff.
Yeah. There, you know, if you get into some kind of an altercation with another student in the 8th grade, that gets necessarily recorded, digitized, goes into a database, and it stays with you because you're scored. That you know, they're measuring and grading behavior, and it's almost kind of like it's kind of like having a traffic violation, like a DUI. It stays with you for 75 years. And nobody seems to know this, correct?
That's right. Yes, that is right. And what these third parties or evidence-based researchers do with the data is at their discretion, which is just alarming, very alarming. And of course, we know that it's for profit. So these big corporations are making so much money from selling this data, exploiting our children. It's just all it's become a huge money-making endeavor, and it's really unfortunate. And you know what's really unfortunate as well is that our elected officials, our congressmen and congresswomen who we elect to uphold our values, are giving us empty talking points, because there was just a bill that was passed, H.R. 4174, the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, FEPA. And this creates a huge database, a national database with shared linking between states. So it's just really, really dangerous. And it's
April, I'm seeing some social engineering that's going on here that is, I would argue, we don't know who's making these decisions, and it could be very subjective too. So I see some major implications when it comes to social engineering, and I see some others where they are necessarily altering the text and the textbooks, the studies, and how classes are taught. You know, based on data mining the data that's in these databases, and so parents, and I would say some teachers don't even, their voices are being drowned out in this, right?
That's right. Well, you know, the teachers teach to the curriculum, and all of that stuff is being changed. But now, because of the social and emotional learning and all of the data that they're collecting, they're now starting new teaching techniques. And there's something that's happening in North Dakota called hacking, where the student pretty much comes up with the best way to go about solving a problem, or they work in groups where it's peer-to-peer instruction. And I just think that's really strange. You know, how are they getting the proper technique to do something? They're just kind of coming up with this stuff themselves. And I found that to be alarming. I had no idea about it until our North Dakota PI president brought that to my attention. And I looked into it online, and it's right there on their northdakota.gov, or sorry, I'm not sure what the website is, but you know, their education website. Plain as day.
April, let's go back to this data mining stuff, because I mean, you talk about the P20W. Are there some HIPAA violation implications here?
That's a good question. You know, now that FERPA has been weakened, well, HIPAA is still pretty strong. So medical data, yes, has been leaking into different parts of education, especially now that FERPA has been weakened. So it's not just demographic data that they're collecting. It is medical, it is psychological, it is whether or not your parents own a gun, whether or not you're seeing your parents drink alcohol. I mean, it's all kinds of very intimate personal data on your family, income, I mean, everything. And you think it's mind-boggling, and you think there's no way they can keep track of all that. Well, that's what this recent bill just helped do, was broaden that federal database, that national database, so that we can get more data, because this latest bill, the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, Paul Ryan claims that Congress needs this bill so that they can collect more data and see what programs and what things aren't working, which there are several programs that are in place now that have shown to be ineffective, but yet we still need this bill, right? And I also want to throw in there that not one Republican spoke in opposition of this recent bill passing, including Paul Mitchell from Michigan, who signed our Stop Fed Ed pledge. So I was pretty disappointed to see that happening. It's almost as if sometimes congressmen and women laugh at us activists, but then they campaign on our side, on our values, on our, our talking points. So we were pretty disappointed with that. And I hope that we can talk to members of the House Oversight Committee and Education Committee to try and put in something to fix this.
Let's go to HR 4174 here for a second. It passed the House, but it has not passed the Senate, correct?
That's right, and that is the bill that I was just referring to.
Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that the House bill couldn't get bundled into something else that we may not know until it comes in at the last minute, and they just sort of add a paper clip and put it in there in the Senate side.
Yes, I am actually not sure if exactly how that would work, but yes, I do believe that that is possible. Yes.
So we have a data rights issue, and I would argue in this particular case that they're actually taking the data and doing whatever they're doing with the data. I mean, we don't even know how they're cultivating it and what they're doing with it on the backside, which there could be thousands of possibilities. But when it comes to personal property rights, your data is your own, and that is part of the family. And if they're taking this data, then they're doing so without full disclosure, meaning permission, acknowledgement, and any kind of attribution. So I would say it would violate a couple of amendments here, would it not?
That's right. Yes, that's exactly right. It is being taken without permission, without parental consent. And I agree 100%. Yes, that's why a lot of people are so upset. I mean, just in general at the whole idea of it, but that it's just blatantly going against the Constitution.
Is there a way to opt out? Has there been any part of that discussion?
We have had, we've got a research committee, and they have been putting together a few points and action items for parents, things that parents can do. So right now, no, you can homeschool, I believe, or, alternative schooling, yes. But as of right now, it's a real mess.
Do we have a sense, April, on who these third parties are that they're selling the data to?
That would be, it's Google. It's anyone who can use this data. I mean, textbook
companies.
People who write the textbooks. That's another multi-million-dollar industry right there. But the scary thing is that they say that it's anybody who, and I'm sorry, I don't have the information right in front of me, but anyone who considers themselves to be, I believe it's a education researcher or policy, something like that. And it's very vague. They don't really go into the definition of who these people are. So that's why it's really concerning as well.
Do we know who sponsored this bill? Where this bill actually came from, the HR 4174?
That was Paul Ryan. Yes.
Paul Ryan did it in October of 2017. I see that. I haven't seen a word come out of Betsy DeVos's Department of Education at all on this thing. Let's see.
I think Ms. DeVos right now and the department. I know that they've been dealing with the ESSA plans, and I haven't seen anything from her either on this bill, which is pretty interesting, I'd say. But we haven't tried to reach out to her office or anything like that either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this thing came out of committee too, so it looks like it's got almost full Republican support on this thing. Evidence-based policy making, open government data track. Yeah. Background.
Trey Gowdy. It went through Trey Gowdy's committee, the oversight committee, and he chairs that committee. He's actually from South Carolina. I'm not in his district, but he's in the upstate, and we've got many members up there who are not happy at all with Mr. Gowdy right now. So we've had them calling his office and writing letters. You know, that's something that people can do across the country. It's, you know, you get you and your friends or your family members together, write letters to your congressmen, call their offices. If you are not a constituent of someone's district, so like if I tried to call Trey Gowdy, they would not be as interested in hearing from me as if with someone from his district. So it's really, you know, if you want to get involved, go to our website, uspie.org, join the movement, and we can start doing things like this in your area. Because that's what's going to have to happen.
The main reason, let's see, the commission found that while federal policymakers need good information on which to base their decisions, too little evidence is produced to meet this need. There are all kinds of evidence that 80 to 90% of the programs in medicine, social science, and business fail. That's the main reason we need to have more evidence. We need to develop these programs. Have a good reputation, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, there may be something to that, but you know, parents have no concept, and they don't even have the option of, one, knowing what it all is, who the data is being sold to, how much data, how long it lasts. Yeah, I mean,
I got an email from Jane Robbins. She was talking about the Obamacare-related home visiting program. I don't know if you know about that. That was implemented where government officials go to the home of students who are in public school, and now they're starting to go to people who are in alternative schools, so homeschooling, because they don't, they've been doing that for quite some time. But that was one of the programs that was shown that data showed to be ineffective. Yet Congress did not cut funding for that program. So what makes us think that they're going to do the same thing with this bill or any other data collecting bill? You know, it's empty talking points. And it's disappointing.
You can manipulate data. I mean, you can manipulate data all day long. All you have to do is put out a report. It goes, the data shows this, but they didn't look at this data. They didn't look at that column. They excluded this one. You know, I mean, you can manipulate.
Yes. And they're asking children on these surveys that they give them very leading questions. You know, you can ask a question a certain way to get a certain answer. And I read a lady from Pennsylvania, one of our Pennsylvania chapter members sent me something a couple weeks ago, and I was reading the questions. And if you think a 10-year-old child reading this, I'm like, it was incredible, because they obviously would have picked one of the answers, because I would have picked it. You know, it's just very leading, and the data is obviously going to be skewed that way. So you're right. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So we have a data rights problem here. Have any lawyers that you know of taken a look at this that says that, you know, this absolutely is personal information and has to have the permission of the parent? And I would even say at some point, if you're a senior in high school, 18 years or older, you have the option of having just the student go, wait. Because I know a lot of people don't want to put, you know, they're very angry at the Yahoos and the Googles and the Facebooks and the Twitters, because they've been data mining too. And using that data as a profit, you know, item.
Right.
So, I mean, you know, students are being exploited. So have lawyers looked at this?
We have not done that. We haven't taken steps to have a lawyer look at this and go over it with them. But I have talked to different like-minded organizations who have done that, and they haven't blatantly said that, yes, this is absolutely, but they have pretty much said that.
Man, I see this as being hugely dangerous.
I would tell parents to do your homework. You can ask what methods your state is using to protect the data, because each state, has the state longitudinal database. So now they're wanting to link all of those together. But you can ask what methods your state is using to protect that data. You can ask to see the type of data that they're collecting, which agencies and third-party vendors have access. You can also, like I said, go to our website, uspie.org, join the movement. I will put you in touch with the state chapter president in your state. My contact information is on the website, so you can ask me, you can call me, email me anytime if you'd like to get involved. I'd love to help you out.
Trey Gowdy and Blake Farenthold, who obviously have Blake Farenthold's got his own issues right here at the moment, but he is actually a co-sponsor, as was Trey Gowdy. They even suspended the rules on motion, so they did pass it. It was a voice vote too.
That's right. Yes, and I actually watched that. I watched them all testify, and not one Republican spoke in opposition. So I'm not really sure. It's just sad. It is. It's very disappointing. So we're going to do all we can to make sure that they feel the heat for not withholding the platform and the values and of the people that elected them. So.
What's pretty fascinating, April, is this didn't even come out through the Department of Education committees. This came out through the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs committees. So that may be a ploy into itself, that they didn't even put this into an education oversight committee.
That's right, and I think that we are new. We've been talking to a lot of members of the House Education Committee, but we've kind of shifted gears to the Oversight Committee. I think there's going to be a lot of sparsing and putting bills through different ways. So very interesting, huh?
I can absolutely see that. That's kind of an interesting thing. It's a move. It's a tactical move that I had not considered before. So I think you've done us a public service announcement that you'd think that a bill that has something to do with some particular issue would happen in that committee, and now all of a sudden we're seeing that maybe not so much.
That's exactly right. And I didn't realize it either until this bill, actually. I didn't even think about that. And then this bill came out, and it came through, the Oversight Committee, and we're all thinking, what? But then we kind of realized once it just passed like that with voice vote, I mean, come on.
And we don't even have a CBO cost estimate on this thing either, much less has anybody given a constitutional authority statement on the whole thing. April Fu with US PIE, which is United States Parents Involved in Education. The website is USP as in Paul, IE.org. Significant system here, and it tells you that there's some forces working against some things that I would say are really crossing the line here when it comes to education and people's future, because whatever they've done in the past apparently is just going to hang with them forever. April, thank you so much for being here. Please come back, because this really deserves some huge attention, and good job with this. We'll get this out in a big way.
Thank you so much.
All right, well done, April, and thanks so much. And ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. There's more coming your way.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you these two 24/7 streams of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. Talk America Radio is a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. Please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. You can contribute monthly or send us a one-time amount. We'll put it to good use continuing to share the American voice. Thank you.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
You're listening to your local news source, WLBB, News Talk 1330 and FM 106.3.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia, and WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Got John Groen with us at Pacific Legal Foundation. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about a interesting case, and this we actually talked to the the person that Pacific Legal actually represented in a property rights dispute that didn't really win, but there were some cool people in Wisconsin that helped Donna win. So John is here to tell us a cool thing that has happened since that case is essentially settled, and how come the Muir family, and extended family, I might add, is very happy. So thank you, John. We love the follow-ups because, we need to hear some good stories every once in a while.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting thing because, here you are, the United States Supreme Court issues a very controversial decision last June, a Justice Kennedy decision where he departed from the normal block that he would vote with Chief Justice Roberts and Thomas and Alito, and he wrote a majority opinion that has just confounded law professors and the real estate industry, and really turned the idea of what is private property on its head. And, with all that controversy that ensued, there's still a real family that's involved in this. Donna Muir and her siblings and extended family, they're real people. It's not theoretical. It's not, often these cases, they go to the Supreme Court, and you can lose touch with the reality that there's real people involved. Well, in the state of Wisconsin, which technically won the case, nevertheless, the people of Wisconsin were sufficiently outraged by the result of allowing the Muir's family property to be taken away without any compensation, that they reacted. And the legislature, Senator Tom Tiffany and Representative, and I just lost his name momentarily there, proposed legislation in Wisconsin to provide a legislative fix. And that's exactly what they did. And Governor Walker has now signed the legislation, and the MERS are able to use the parcel of property that has long been in the family or to sell it. Either way, they have their property rights restored in Wisconsin. So it was an exciting day, a great moment for the Murr family, and an example of how even if the Supreme Court goes in a direction that is frustrating and legally, we believe, unsound, that doesn't mean that the battle is over. There are real people, and it's great when you have a response that takes care of the people of Wisconsin to restore their property rights.
Has I want to be a snot, but has, like, Governor Walker or the Muir family, the other congressman was Adam Jarko.
Yes, thank you.
She has, to be snarky, has Governor Walker or the Muir family kind of sent a little letter over there to Justice Kennedy and go, nee, 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 nee?
I don't think they've done anything like that, but I suspect that Justice Kennedy will have or already has learned of the action, and it should cause them, a moment to pause, because Justice Kennedy said, "Oh well, we're just trying to do what's reasonable." Well, Wisconsin showed them what is reasonable, and that lot lines do matter, and that people do have expectations based on lot lines, and that our system of real estate and understanding what is private property has always been based on the idea that when you buy a parcel and you acquire fee title, there is a legal description providing where that parcel sits on the earth, and it's bounded by these lot lines. Lot lines do matter, and they should matter more than anything else. That's what is reasonable, and when you have that parcel, certain rights are secured by that deed and that legal description. And for Justice Kennedy to have blown through that is that's what we say, that it is a very disturbing opinion, and being discussed, in the law circles and at seminars. I'm all over the country talking about this, and it has people scratching their heads, but it's good to see that, real people understand that private property does have very realistic expectations and is defined by its lot line boundaries.
John, as a refresher, this case was what, 15 years old? Is that right? I mean, this family had essentially a couple of parcels of land. They wanted to sell off one parcel in order to improve a structure or a cabin on the other one, and that's when the county stepped in and said, no, you can't do anything, which was essentially taking away their property rights and taking away really their property without compensating them. Did I really narrow that down?
Yeah. I would add a few things. I think the listeners should understand that the Murr family, they bought the original parcel in 1960, and they built a cabin on it as a recreational parcel. And this whole area along the St. Croix River in Wisconsin was it was all subdivided out. The waterfront pieces were all divided out. They're all a little over an acre, and they were all being built upon. People were buying them up. And the Murr family realized that, we love it here too. This is a great place. Let's buy another parcel as an investment. And so they did that. In 3 years after they bought the first parcel, they had a separate transaction, and they bought another parcel. It happened just by chance to be the property right next door. That's the one that was vacant. Well, they left it vacant for decades and just took care of it, and they enjoyed their other parcel that had the cabin on it. The time eventually came where both parcels had been passed on to the Murr parents, passed on to their children who are now grown, and that's Donna Murr and her brothers and sisters. And when the Murr family realized, this is in 2004, that it was time to finally fix up the old cabin that they enjoyed so much, their family legacy, and they thought, now's the time to take advantage of the very wise investment their parents had made in the vacant parcel next door. So they went to go to sell it, and that's when the government said, sorry, because you own the property next door with the cabin, we are treating these two parcels as effectively merged. And although you've been paying separate taxes on both parcels, with both parcels assessed as independent, developable parcels, the government said we're treating them as one, and so you cannot sell the vacant parcel without also selling the cabin parcel. And of course, the Murrs, they loved their cabin. That's not what they wanted to do at all, and that's why they brought the takings claim. And so it was a long process in the courts. They went through the system in Wisconsin, lost all the way, were denied compensation on the idea that, well, their parcel as a whole was both parcels. And since they had a cabin on one parcel, they had some economic use. So they could be denied all economic use of the other parcel because they still had some. Yeah, that's the issue before the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, the Justice Kennedy decision determined that, well, we are going to treat the two parcels as one, and bought off on that analysis. A terrible decision. Chief Justice Roberts, joined by Justice Alito and Justice Thomas, he just wrote a scathing dissent. If you have time, I can just give you a couple little snippets.
Yeah, please.
He wrote, this is in the second paragraph, Chief Justice Roberts wrote, where the majority goes astray, however, is in concluding that the definition of private property at issue in a case such as this turns on an elaborate test. And he then goes into, the majority decided that whether this was one parcel or two parcel would require all kinds of analysis and test, and it depends on all these different factors, very difficult to apply. He answered that, and he said, quote, I think the answer is far more straightforward. State laws define the boundaries of distinct units of land, and those boundaries should, in all but the most exceptional circumstances, determine the parcel at issue. That's what we argued, and he agreed, and anybody who hears these facts, they agree as well. He wrote in another part, quote, state law creates distinct parcels of land and defines the rights that come along with owning those parcels. Those established bundles of rights should define the private property in regulatory takings cases. Yeah, that's a very simple proposition, and it's something that all property owners understand when they buy property. That's why I believe the majority's decision is really not grounded in traditional concepts of real estate and property law. And so at Pacific Legal Foundation, we are working now to develop the next cases, and we expect that the majority decision will not ultimately stand the test of time, because it's just not based on common understandings and traditional principles of property law. There you go. The Chief Justice concluded this way. He said, and I love this quote, this is just another opportunity to gerrymander the definition of private property. Yes, gerrymander the definition of private property to defeat a takings claim. Put simply, today's decision knocks the definition of private property loose from its foundation on stable state law rules and throws it into the maelstrom of multiple factors that come into play at the second step of the takings analysis. The result? The majority's new framework compromises the takings clause as a barrier between individuals and the press of the public interest. Chief Justice Roberts gets it. He sees the ramifications of this kind of decision, and so that's why we continue to work. We know that we're on the right side of the principles, and so ultimately we have to believe that this decision will be corrected. But meanwhile, the state of Wisconsin has already corrected it for the MERS and other people who are property owners in Wisconsin.
Two things. Our country gets more divided by the hour. And you kind of, I think, done a little bit of a service here, because you have also, we don't pay attention to what happens out of the Supreme Court. We don't pay attention. We don't get a chance to read all the, opinions. And, things move too fast out here. We're mostly in, rag headlines out here. But it's fascinating to see that there is a lot of conflict of opinion and argument, even when it comes to justices sitting on the Supreme Court, where you can just about imagine when they leave the courtroom and they go back into their respective conference rooms and talk to each other, those discussions must be epic.
Yeah, I would love. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall listening to the conferences on the Murr case.
Yes.
And how they discussed it. These remain secret, of course, and eventually, a certain number of years after a justice passes away, or retires, their notes become available, but it's only after the fact. And there have been some books that have gotten into some of those discussions. There's one called The Brethren, I believe, and there's been others. But in our particular field of private property rights, some of the revelations that we later learned, it was the 1978 decision in a case called Penn Central, where the court first coined the phrase parcel as a whole. And that phrase, parcel as a whole, is what we've been debating since 1978. And that ultimately was the question presented in the Murr case. What is the parcel as a whole? And but the stories I've heard are way back in 1978. Some of those concepts just came from some of the law clerks, and there's interesting nuances that you learn years later about how a decision came to be. And I'm sure there's probably some pretty interesting stories like that we won't know for a good number of years regarding the Murr case.
We hear, from you lawyers. In law school, I was told this, and my law professor did that. But you said something else kind of interesting. You lawyers across the country do read an awful lot of each other's cases, and you check and see who's taking the case, what law firm here is doing this, who's doing that. And you guys tend to get together. You make friends, and you kind of dismiss some others, but you literally do talk about activities and cases and arguments and their results. And we don't necessarily have a concept of all of that. I mean, when you guys travel and you go to some little session, in Indianapolis, right. I imagine some of the seminars necessarily are pretty fascinating, but the conversations at the bar later on over a martini have to be absolutely just as epic as the official, unofficial conversations between the justices on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting. When you've had the opportunity to argue a case like this, it was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. I would have loved to have won it. But the aftermath, which is what you're talking about, is fascinating as well. There's these many seminars, continuing education of the bar, and other things like that, where we're discussing the case and what it means, and there's a lot of different views, and people think that they all have their various thoughts about it. One of the interesting things, though, along the lines that you just mentioned, is my opposing counsel, Misha. He and I have been at a number of conferences together, and he typically begins by saying, well, I'm probably feel less like a victor in this than probably anybody who's ever won a Supreme Court case, because he agrees with me that the decision is really not, it's not the position he advocated at all. Justice Kennedy went off on a very different direction that even Wisconsin didn't support.
He went sideways.
Yeah, and so pretty fascinating when your opposing counsel and yourself are agreeing. And he's the Solicitor General for the state of Wisconsin, and the state of Wisconsin has backed it up by saying, yeah, we're going to pass a law to fix this because we don't like it either. Very unique circumstance. So obviously at PLF, we're using this opportunity. We wanted to begin in Wisconsin, and we've got some legislation, but we'll look to other states as well to see if we can get some legislative fixes, while also continuing to use that network of attorneys and try and find, where is another case that presents the right kind of opportunity to pursue inroads to ultimately really overrule the Murr decision. Obviously at Pacific Legal Foundation, we are very strategic in trying to identify the cases that present the right opportunity for constitutional challenge. We can't just take every case. We engage in what we call strategic constitutional litigation, identifying the cases that we think frame the issues in a way that we can present it to the U.S. Supreme Court. Part of that is that network of attorneys, talking with our colleagues all around the country and being aware of what are the cases that are percolating up, and then strategically getting involved where we need to and taking over the case. That's the way the Murr case developed. I took over the case when it was done at the Wisconsin Court of Appeals. And so that's the way the Pacific Legal Foundation works, and uses that network of attorneys that you just mentioned.
The Murr case, obviously, John, is a private ownership. It's an individual family ownership as opposed to a business. I can see where even a company that owns property that they want to expand or they want to sell something off, that they may be quite interested. So the point is not only is it for an individual property owner, but a corporation is an entity, and they would have, I would think, often a situation just like this. And I also believe that the entire real estate industry would have a huge interest in this.
Oh, absolutely. And they filed briefs in support of the Murr family at the Supreme Court. Anybody, whether it's an individual, think farmers who have several properties that all comprise their farm, any corporation, company, whenever you have separate parcels that happen to be side by side, then there's now a level of risk that did not exist before. It's startling. And, the mortgage industry and, title insurance is all based on lot lines, So we have a whole system of real estate that is built upon respecting the integrity of lot lines and the boundaries described in a deed. And this undermines that. And
well, you had a whole bunch of lawyers that, before the property was even bought, they had to go through and do the investigations. You got, as you said, you've got title insurance, you've got deeds, you've got closing lawyers and all this other. I mean, so you got lawyer after lawyer after lawyer, and all of a sudden, it flies in the face of the Fifth Amendment, where these people weren't going to be compensated for their property.
Yeah, and all of this underscores why it's my belief that ultimately the decision by Justice Kennedy in Murr will not stand the test of time. It will either be broken down by it being distinguished in subsequent cases, or ultimately just overruled.
I still think the Murr family ought to send them a postcard, one of those that says "Wish you were here."
Well, Donna and particularly a couple of her brothers, they just might do that. Who knows?
Yeah,
I just want to say, Denise, they are such a great family. I think you've talked.
I talked to Donna. I had Donna. She was a delightful, delightful woman, and she explained that she never thought this was going to be such a journey, and that how much that she had learned, and she is a much different person, paying much different kinds of attention today than she ever thought she would, as a result of this.
Yeah, the Murr family, it could be anybody in America. They are just a fun-loving, classic family that has this property that they're so thankful that their parents or and now great-grandparents to that's how many generations have gone by, that they bought this parcel. They don't have a bunch of money or anything. They are just such a normal American family living their life, and the last thing they ever thought was that they would end up
in the Supreme Court.
Supreme Court. So it has been quite a journey for them, and they've just been. It's truly been an honor for Pacific Legal Foundation and myself personally to represent them.
Well, that's a nice thing to say. I'm not sure a lot of lawyers would necessarily say that. Pacific Legal, you guys are always fun, because I like to have you guys on to describe some of these cases, because I do say that you're the unsung heroes. I say that with every one of you lawyers that come on the Denise Simon Experience, because it's the truth. You guys are just doing yeoman's work out there that affect an awful lot of things going down the road that we don't necessarily realize. I'm sorry you didn't win the case, but you won it in the back door, and that's really kind of cool. So isn't it fun? It's John against the Supreme Court.
Yeah, well, it's more than that, though, because what we do at PLF, we're a band of litigators doing what we can, in the battle for liberty and justice for all. But it takes our supporters. We're a nonprofit and charitable organization, and without our supporters, we could do nothing. So it's a whole team approach. Is both internally within PLF, we really are a team working together, but our team includes all of our supporters, and that's where the strength comes from.
Thank you, John. Well done. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you again very soon.